Next, from Chicago, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz talks with Ted Drabrowski of the Illinois Policy Institute about the state's efforts to cut the cost of state pensions. We'll also hear why the unfunded liabilities in the state's pensions are likely much higher than often cited, $83 billion. This runs about 30 minutes.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Ted Drabrowski. He is the Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. So when you think about it, when you're VP Policy at a place that says they're the Illinois Policy Institute, you got to know policy, right? I mean, and you got to know politics because the two go hand in hand. We had the old Mayor Daley, the real Mayor Daley, as they used to say. I think it was Richard J. Daley who said, good politics is good public policy, and good public policy is good politics. And Ted Drabrowski, I ask you, so you're dealing with this pension stuff. You're trying to grapple with it. I mean, people say it's $83 billion unfunded, and you're going to tell us it's about, the problem is maybe 3 or 4 times that scope. So hold on to your, what is it? Hold on to your wigs and keys, is that what Letterman would say? Whatever, hold on to something because you're going to be shocked to hear the scope of this problem. It's truly astounding. So he's going to be able to talk about that, and Ted then can say, and here's what you do to solve it. It's like a no-brainer, right?
That's right.
I mean, it's not rocket sciences here. I mean, it's not brain surgery. You just use a little economics, use a little politics, because you have to have some finesse in this business. You can't just say, go do it. You have to be cognizant of the fact that we got 59 state senators. We have 118 members of the State House. We got the governor. We got the Supreme Court that may have some say in this, right?
That's right.
And so solving that is, it's like a general equilibrium problem in economics or a 200 equation simultaneous something, whatever we used to talk about in math. See how easily the brain goes, folks? I used to know this stuff cold. And so, but seriously, you're dealing with, what might be straightforward policy, but aren't you forced at the Illinois Policy Institute to be aware of politics and sort of bring the two together, politics and public policy?
Absolutely. Policy is what we would like to see happen because it's the right thing to do. It's either the right incentives, it's the right way to take care of people's future, it's how to keep a state healthy, how to help it grow. That's policy. Unfortunately, we have the reality of politics. Politics takes that policy. Some people have different views on what the right policy should be. It gets negotiated, redefined sometimes, and minds meet in certain places. Sometimes, though, it's the wrong policy for the state, and sometimes it's the right policy.
So if you're watching this, and if you've been watching our program, you see we've been focusing from a variety of perspectives on the so-called pension problem. People saying it's $83 billion underfunded. That is, they're saying politicians, legislators, governors should have been working together for many years to see that money is getting set aside. Instead, they've just been spending like drunken sailors. And they said, we're having a good time, we're having a party, and we're not going to put money in reserve, and we're going to do some accounting tricks. And so that happens, and now people realized, chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak, in that the credit rating agencies are looking at the bonds that Illinois issues and say, look, you got this problem here. You're going to either have to increase taxes, cut spending tremendously. You're going to have to do something if you're going to pay off these bonds and not cut spending tremendously elsewhere or raise taxes a lot. And so we're going to say it's unlikely. You may not be able to pay off those bonds. We're going to rate them close to junk bonds. So that means Illinois has to pay a much higher interest rate to finance its normal operations. That's a signal. And then people may be saying, they're not going to come, employers not going to come to the state if they see this big pension liability out there and they're not sure where that money going to come from. Is it going to come from the corporation, raise taxes even further since we had a big corporate income tax increase and we had an employee or individual income tax increase a few years back when it went from 3% to 5% and on the corporate side 4.8 to 7.2. And yet, Rahm Emanuel would say, look, we just had a big company decide to come here, and we see that all the time. And people are coming out of the suburbs and going to the city because they say they can recruit people. Employees want to be working in Chicago. It's where it's happening, man. They don't be working in Boise, Idaho, or some other place you might say taxes are lower. So let's start right there, and then we'll come to the detail. But you heard that from Rahm Emanuel. You know, he said Chicago's the idea place. And we're attracting people like that. We're going to be attracting companies. People want the culture here. They want the symphony orchestra. They want the research establishments and research universities. And we'll work it out. That's what Rahm says. Pat Quinn says, we'll work it out. What do you say?
Well, Jeff, those are comments that we hear, and I want to come to that, but I want to just quickly finalize the point on policy and politics. We talked about what's good policy versus what's politics. The politics that we've had for the past 15, 20 years, and even more so in the last 5 to 7, has showed us what problems are being created by the policy choices that were made by this government. We've got $7 or $8 billion in unpaid bills. We've got the worst credit rating in the nation. We continue to run budget deficits. There's a lot of problems in the state. People are leaving in droves. We've calculated that one person leaves every 10 minutes on a net basis from Illinois over the last 15 years. These are policies that were chosen through politics. And so it very much matters what policies are chosen, and that's why you hear us being strong proponents of the right policy. And you'll hear us not try to negotiate with ourselves and come up with compromise solutions. What we need are good policies.
In your starting point as a think tank, as an organization, liberty, free market, applications and solutions. You believe in liberty, your organization does, the Illinois Policy Institute does, and you believe in free market applications. The two go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
If you employ free market applications and solutions, you'll have more liberty. If you focus on maintaining your liberty, you'll look for ways, free market solutions, right?
Correct.
That's the essence of your organization.
That's the essence, and I think a good example of what's not that is the government raising taxes like they did in 2011, raising taxes on corporations. They raised $1 billion, and they turned around and gave 1/7 of that money to 2 companies, CME and Sears. So they raised taxes on all the companies in Illinois and turned around and gave a big chunk to 2 companies. That's not free markets. That is bureaucrats. That's Springfield choosing the winners and losers, rather than having a great scenario for all companies, which means lower taxes.
So you're saying if you had if they didn't try to give to these 2 companies, they would say to keep them here, they had to give them incentives, right?
That's
CME
right.
Group and who was the other one?
Sears.
And Sears. Your contention is if they didn't do that, they could lower taxes on everybody else, and so that would be consistent with the way it should be. You're not picking winners and losers. But they'd say, well, Illinois might have lost CME and Sears.
Well, if they hadn't raised the taxes in the first place, they wouldn't have to have given a incentive for them to stay.
So you're saying they could have kept taxes lower, they wouldn't have to give that incentive, and you would be fairer, and you would be not picking winners and losers.
That's right. And
you would let the market decide who's best.
That's right. You'd have these hundreds of thousands of companies with a lower tax base so they can compete.
And now people say, well, there is this $83 billion unfunded liability, and Governor Quinn said months ago, before the session ended in Springfield, we have to increase the retirement age, maybe from 55 to 62, which is now to me more like 62 to 67, depending on the
Correct.
occupation and so forth. We have to increase the employee contributions by a significant amount. If it's 8% now, it should be 11%. If it's 9, it should be 12 or so. And we have to modify the COLA, because the COLA, the cost of living adjustment now, is not really a cost of living adjustment. It's an automatic 3% a year, no matter what what level of inflation is. So we have to make it sensitive to inflation, and we have to reduce the likely benefits. If we do all of those things, I think he said, you'll deal with the $80 billion underfunding, and you'll be on course to be in equilibrium. What do you say to Pat Quinn?
We say to Pat Quinn, those are good moves to help the budget become a little bit more sustainable, but those are not the reforms that Illinois needs. They're not sufficient. They are not long-term fixes. They are simply partial Band-Aids, maybe sometimes depending on how assertive it is, how far the reforms go. They can be a good cast, but they are not the reforms that Illinois needs.
You're saying if they do roughly the magnitude, he didn't have specific legislation, but he had some notion, and people have guessed what he meant in terms of how much of an adjustment should be made. So estimating that adjustment, assuming you had it right, if they do those things, you're saying you're still going to have tremendous underfunding, because you're saying the $83 billion problem is more than $83 billion.
Right.
Is that
So,
right?
so there's two problems with his plan. And let me give you the first one. The first one is that we've got senators, legislators, they're all talking about an $83 billion problem. The reality is that we have a much bigger problem. Not only do we have the $83 billion underfunding in the state pension plans, but we have $54 billion in underfunding in state retiree health care. We have another $50 billion in local and county and other types of jurisdictions. So that totals $200 billion of liabilities that we have. On top of that, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board just came out and said that Illinois' rate that they use to calculate their liabilities is too high. In other words, the liability that we have is even higher. It starts to approach $300 billion.
Because they're not going to make the rate of return that they're estimating,
Correct.
which means you're going to have to put more money in there because you're not making.
That's right.
You're not making 8.5%. Maybe you're making 7%.
That's right.
So
Or-
if they
or
thought
maybe
you had to
3 or
put
4.
in X, you need to put in X plus 10 or 20 or 30
That's
billion
correct.
dollars.
So this problem is much bigger. So whenever we start and you know what, on a household level, the liabilities that we have are over $40,000 per household. They're huge. So we can't think that we can make some reforms and fix the problem. They have to be real reforms, not just some budget solutions. That's problem number one.
So if they did what you understand Quinn to be recommending, they will diminish, they will cut the scope of the problem, but they won't solve it, and they'll be back in the future saying
be
you
back
either
in the
have to
future.
raise taxes or you have to cut the benefits even more.
Right. And you know,
At some point, well, could they just say, well, you make the COLA adjustment even more than you have now, reduce the benefits, right now it might cut it in half, the COLA, maybe you have to cut it in a tenth, maybe you have to freeze the
Maybe
COLA.
you have to freeze it, right.
Maybe you have to say cut the COLA. Isn't that what they did in Rhode Island?
that's what they did in Rhode Island. That's
So
right.
just freeze it. Maybe here you have to freeze it for 20 years, not 10 years. Folks, you're not going to get any adjustment whatsoever. Employee contribution, instead of going from 8 to 11%, maybe you need to go from 8 to 14%. The retirement age, well, you're not going to push people to work much longer than 67. So if
Okay.
you start ratcheting those things up, you do maybe get closer to a solution to the problem.
But let me
Don't you
explain.
think?
Well, you get a solution maybe temporarily to a financial solution. The problem we have here is that it's a political issue. The biggest problem I have with Governor Quinn's plan is that he continues to keep the defined benefit plan alive. And what we know about the defined benefit plan in Illinois is it allows the pension system to be nothing more than a slush fund. They'll fund it when they want to. They'll not fund it when they don't. They had a pension holiday in 2006 and 2007. They actually had a legal holiday from funding the pension system. And how they got away with that nomenclature, I don't even know. But $2.3 billion were not put into the fund those 2 years. They can, in the future, they can change the benefits, and that's what they'll do. Hey, listen, we're going to hurt you now. We'll pay you back
So
later.
your solution, go to a 401k type thing where the state just puts in money. They're obligated to put in money. They're not obligated to pay out a certain amount of money.
That's right.
Put in the money, let the individual manage it. If they manage it well, and it's within certain prudence, just like, like is the case in the private sector now. The individuals are free within bounds to manage it, but they can't put it all into pork bellies.
That's right.
They can put it into certain common stock, bond, things that are relatively stable. And the same restrictions would apply here, but it would be under their control. So that fits with your theory about freedom and liberty and self-reliance and self-control, and also avoids politicians who maybe, have some sinister motives here. Okay.
They don't have to be sinister. They can be not. They can be.
Or
They can be noble. They're just not the right ones.
They're either inept or they're corrupt, but either way, it's harmful to the beneficiaries.
Right. Look, the private sector used to have defined benefit plans. That used to be the big plan. Now, today, very few have defined benefit plans. Everybody has defined contribution. Somehow, we're allowing that kind of plan to stay alive in the public sector.
Well, people might argue, well, for the government, that's the trade-off. You don't make large sums of money, but at least you get a secure retirement. This is what people will say if you talk to folks in the unions or union leaders. In private sector, you may have some dramatically great years in terms of salary, okay? But your pension is not going to have this nice, high defined benefit. So they're saying in the public sector, you make that trade-off. You don't have the high upside and potential salary, but you do have a more stable, predictable level of benefits because we're paying you defined benefits.
Jeff, that used to be the argument
You heard
30,
that,
30
yeah.
and 40 years ago.
Why can't it be made now?
Because what has happened over the last, especially the last 20 years, is that public sector salaries have screamed up. Public sector benefits, and this is precisely the problem we're talking about, have grown much, much faster than anything in the private sector. So now we're seeing that public sector salaries and total compensation in particular
Can you
are
document
higher
that?
than private sector.
Because a lot of people say, well, people say that, but would you point to studies that show that federal wages are higher than their private counterparts? Federal pensions are higher than their private counterparts. State wages, state government wages, higher, so forth. Government by government level, can you document that going for state by state government unit and say, these have all been studied, it's all well known, and it's shown, or is it simply an assertion, a feeling?
There's a competition of research to show one side's trying to show one side, another's.
Right.
Yeah.
And so people, if they read this and you see it in the Wall Street Journal or you see it in the New York Times, if you're assiduous and diligent, you're going to see mixed results.
You're going to see some mixed results. However, here's what we've done. We did a study called Out of Sync. We could argue about the levels, okay? We could even argue about that. And what we show is that the compensation in the public sector is higher. But what's also very important—
In total, by that you mean salary plus pension.
Plus pension, plus benefits.
Benefits.
When you think about, Jeff, let's just take this. A 401k that a private sector person has is a sum of money. It's one sum, and that money is supposed to last them their retirement period. A public sector retiree gets a fixed amount. If they live 40 years, they keep getting more and more money. So they have a stream, and people who retire at 50, as you know, in some cases, some public sector employees do, that stream, that value of money, which is a fixed amount every month, is huge. So what we're seeing is that the benefits, such as retiree health care, are very large. The bottom line is this. Over the last 15 years, the public sector wage increase in real terms was something like, and I don't have the numbers perfectly in my head, about 17%. The private sector has gone down by 2%. So growth rates alone, ignoring levels, but just growth rates have been much higher for public sector.
And so how do you account for that? Do you, is it a sinister purpose? I know you don't like to say it's sinister, but some would say Democrats holding public office have looked at their benefactors, or I don't know, have looked to the unions to work with them to jack up these wages, and when they do that, the favor is returned by the unions giving, the public sector unions giving substantial campaign contributions to the elected officials who worked with them to get above normal salaries, above normal or above competitive pensions. So is that what's going on here? You're not getting real negotiation going on between the elected officials and the public sector unions. In a sense, there's collusion. You know?
Oh, you've said it very well.
Is that so?
You've said it very well.
And you think, I'm asking as a question, you think that can be documented, shown indisputably? You know, if Dateline wanted to, all these programs that you see on ABC, NBC, so forth, you know, shocking news. This is what's going on in the private sector. These are what these corporate titans are doing. If they wanted to, you're saying they could just go and say, shocking news. Okay, we've looked at this, we've studied the people who've studied this, and it's a charade. The public elected officials, generally Democrats, working with public sector unions, jack up the pensions, and the unions reciprocate, give them campaign contributions so they stay in power, and they continue the cycle up and up. And so that's one. You say it's unequivocally clear. You could have the TV stations, radio stations document this and dramatize it, but they don't. They don't, right?
Well, we have to see what side they're on as well.
Okay.
But I think a clear point is that when FDR said that the last place we should have unions are in the public sector, because it's just a conflict of interest. They are not two separate parties sitting on opposite sides of the table.
You don't think there should be public sector unions?
I think that we support unions, but we don't support are forced unions, forced membership, a requirement to be in.
So you favor what's called right to work laws.
Right to work laws. That's right.
Means if you're working, they shouldn't require you to pay dues to the union.
That's right. And you should be able to not be part
And
of
the
that
unions would say, but you're a free rider then, because they're negotiating on behalf of you, and you're saying, oh, well, I'll get the benefit of that. I'll get the higher wage, higher benefits, but I'm not going to pay. Is there a free rider problem? Would you acknowledge that?
No, you know where I go, right? I go even further, right? I think that we shouldn't have, in cases where some people want a communal contract, that's fine, but I think I prefer individual contracts, just like we have in the private sector. I feel
So
Illinois policy
you don't think there should be collective bargaining on behalf of employees?
Well, I think if unions want to get together and they want a collective bargain on, and again, this is
Not the unions, no, but when you say individual, if you got like 200 employees, should they be allowed to form a union and bargain collectively?
well, we believe people should be able to form unions
Oh,
if
you
they
do?
so
Okay,
choose.
okay.
But again, they shouldn't be forced, and they should only be able to collective bargain things that make sense, such as wages and salaries, but not a lot of the other items that are
Not
included
pension
in that.
benefits, not health care benefits? Okay. So looking at this broad, and so you're saying ultimately then you have to get away from the pension system you have now for the public sector, and you have to go toward a 401k. And if you don't do that, you're going to continue to have problems.
Well, look, with a 401k, I don't have to worry about the politicians changing the COLA levels. I don't have to worry about the politicians changing the retirement levels. I don't have to worry about the politicians changing the benefits that accrue each year. I don't have to worry about the politicians
But the big
funding
hurdle,
the system.
the big hurdle you have to get over, somebody's going to say you're tilting at windmills. Everybody else is in the game. The Republicans, who may be closer to you philosophically, as on average, Republicans may be more free market, more liberty-oriented than Democrats. Democrats may see a greater gain to having government involvement, government intervention. So I'm not saying it in a pejorative way, just analytically. So your allies here, Republicans, Tom Cross, leader in the House, Christine Radogno, leader in the Senate, minority leader, Republican leader. They look and you say, look, we're not going to do 401ks. It can't happen.
Well,
So they can say,
just
Ted,
last year we had
Ted, they can say, Ted, work with us. Make the points you need to make about raising the retirement age, raising the employee contribution, modifying the COLA. If you don't work with us, Ted, we're left with nothing. These other guys got the unions, they got the liberal think tanks, conservative think tanks. You're sort of, you're tilting at windmills.
Well, Jeff, two
I mean,
things. Yeah.
have they said that to you?
No, but Jeff, there's two things.
Okay.
Just a year ago, Tom Cross was pitching a 401k plan as part of
Was
the
he
solution.
really?
That's right.
And
Just
what's
a year
happened?
ago.
What happened? Did he
SB
change his mind?
512, well, things changed. I don't know, political winds change. But number two is political winds can change. And today it may not be popular, but you mentioned about the bond situation. If the economy tanks a little bit more, if for some reason we enter into another tough period, people may not want to finance our bonds.
So you're going to stick to your principles here as out in the Illinois Policy Institute. Don't play politics so much. Don't try to be expedient in that sense. You'll listen, you hear these people make these arguments, but stick to the principles. Eventually you win out. Am I getting that right?
Well, that's well said. I think right now the Republicans are being expedient. We don't need to be expedient.
The
Right?
Republican Party.
The Republican Party. So they're already negotiating if you see the bill that's currently being called by Quinn, it doesn't include teacher pensions. So
You mean it only has the 2 of the 5 funds.
It only
That
has
was
2
the
of the
bill
5
that
funds.
passed the state Senate.
That's right.
But didn't get called by the House.
that's right.
And so it's kind of the baby bill.
Right. So
Dan Duffy, State Senator Dan Duffy, calls it a big joke because it's all set up, he says, so that Senate President Cullerton can say about his members as Democrats, we supported
passed
reform,
reform.
but it only applied to 2 of the 5 funds, and it only applied to changing the COLA, didn't change the retirement age, didn't change the employee contribution, did very little
Right.
to take the state near to where it needs to be.
correct. That's correct.
Okay.
So I think the politicians are going to do a lot of the compromising and the politicizing. But we need to be clear for the residents of Illinois and for the legislators who care. They're going to come out and support bold proposals. And you'll see a couple bold proposals come out pretty soon from a couple of legislators.
Meaning toward a 401k.
That's right.
Or maybe
You'll see
actually
it.
an
And look,
actual 401k,
look, Jeff,
not just toward
Jeff,
a 401k.
look, let me give you an example of what just
Hey,
happened in Rhode Island.
These are going to be Republican state legislators
Yes.
pretty soon?
Yes.
And you put any names out here?
Not yet.
Can we make some news here on August 1?
Not yet. But look,
Yeah, I'll be the first to know. You'll
the
call me.
challenge-
You'll call me
I'll
and
let you
me know.
The
Okay.
challenges you were giving me is, let's look at Democrat Rhode Island a year ago. They were sinking under their own pension problem. They reran the numbers that I mentioned to you with these new discount rates. They found out that education, healthcare, roads were about to be in huge trouble. So a Democrat-controlled state passed the biggest reforms we've seen in Illinois, in the country. They froze COLAs, they raised the retirement age for existing pensions, and they introduced 401ks. They created this hybrid type model. Look, those are big reforms, and that's a Democrat-controlled state. So if Rhode Island can do it, we're not that far away, but we need some winds to change, political winds to change.
But are you getting bogged down in this cost shift thing? Because, you, John Tillman, and the Policy Institute have come out and said, you shouldn't have this system right now where the local school boards determine the pensions, not completely, but in large part, and yet that cost is spread across the state. That's what Speaker Mike Madigan said. The Republican said, he just said that because he wanted a poison pill, because he knew the Republicans can't go for that cost shift because it impinges on upstate areas and suburban areas more. That's where there are more Republicans. It cracks into the Republican vote. You understand that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you agree with that analysis? It does that,
Well,
right?
I'm not sure I agree with that analysis.
But it does, well, politically, I know you're not playing political
No.
science. Okay, but the point is, people are saying this makes strange bedfellows. It puts Mike Madigan, Speaker Mike Madigan, and aligns him with CEO John Tillman of the Illinois Policy Institute, and John Tillman's giving cover, not intentionally, but the effect of his action is to give cover to Speaker Mike Madigan. He could say, you can't say I'm doing poison pill stuff when the same action, the same policy is being advocated by John Tillman of the Illinois Policy Institute.
Right.
You see that. So is Tillman being used, and can he be used by Speaker
No,
Mike Madigan?
I don't think it's that. You need to look at motivations. Madigan has his own motivations for many of the things he does. We'll never know what those are. We are a policy institute, and we're looking at what is good policy. We love transparency, we love accountability. You can't have an open bar scenario, we like to call it the open bar, where everybody's drinking on somebody else's dime.
But people would say, go ahead and make the change, just not now, because you're interfering with, I know you want to focus on 401k, but you would agree some positive effect can come from modifying the COLA down, increasing the retirement age, increasing the employee contribution. By pushing this now, this cost shift, you're making it harder to accomplish those other things. The perfect is the enemy of the good. So wait, do it some other time. Just don't do it now. That's what I think they might say to you. Be a little bit more politically sensitive. They're not saying sacrifice your principles completely.
Jeff,
What do you say to those folks when they make that argument?
look,
Do you hear that argument, and what do you say to them?
look, the current plan that Quinn's proposes, he trades off. He says, look, do my pension benefits, I'll let you keep your health care benefits. That's a bad plan, right? He's doing a trade. He's letting...
You don't want to do that.
Well, he needs to cut both. We have a $54 billion
But he's saying you
problem.
can't. We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, Ted Drabrowski. He's VP Policy, Illinois Policy Institute. Thanks so much for coming here, Ted.
Thank you.
It's an interesting discussion. Are we going toward a 401k? Is what you're hearing the politicians on both parties talk about not solving the problem? That's what Ted's saying. Is he right? We discuss, you decide.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.